famous pianist told Ozzy Osbourne to play piano as a joke. What happened next shocked everyone. You play this piano, don't make me laugh, the famous pianist chuckled. But the moment Ozzy touched the keys, everyone in the hall stopped breathing. Before the story begins, make sure to subscribe to our channel Voices of Darkness and like or share the video with friends. If you love Ozzy Osbourne, then share this video now and help us reach our 1000 subscribers target. Prove your love. The rain had just begun when Ozzy Osbourne stepped out of the black SUV. His long hair, slightly messy from the weather, clung to the sides of his face. His round glasses fogged up instantly, catching the neon reflections from the Grand Concert Hall in London, the Royal Aurelius Hall, home to the greatest classical performances of the century. But tonight, Ozzy wasn't here to perform. He wasn't here to be a rock star. He wanted silence, music, something gentle for once. Inside, people stared, a few whispered, some laughed quietly. Ozzy, in a classical music concert hall, was like a wolf walking into a room full of ballet dancers, unexpected and judged. Before he even sat down, but Ozzy didn't care. He quietly took a seat in the last row and listened to the rehearsals on stage. A world-famous pianist, Strauss, known as the modern Beethoven, was practicing his solo for the upcoming charity gala. His fingers moved like lightning, his posture elegant, his ego enormous. After finishing an explosive run across the keys, Leonard lifted his chin proudly as everyone applauded. Everyone, except Ozzy. He simply closed his eyes, breathing in the sound. Leonard noticed. He didn't like it. "What? The Prince of Darkness doesn't approve," Leonard said loudly, making sure the hall heard. A few musicians chuckled. Ozzy opened one eye slowly. "I think you're good," he said calmly. "But music isn't just speed." Leonard's face tightened. "Oh, and what would you know about classical music? You break guitars, not play them." Some people snickered. Someone even whispered, "He's washed up." Ozzy stood quietly and walked toward the stage. His boots echoed as the hall fell silent. Leonard crossed his arms. "You want to try?" he asked sarcastically. "You want to play my piano?" Ozzy looked at the instrument. A massive, polished Steinway D grand piano, worth more than most houses. He stepped closer. Leonard moved aside dramatically with a smug grin. "Go on, Ozzy," he mocked. "Play something. We could use a laugh." The orchestra giggled. Ozzy brushed his fingers over the keys. "Cold, smooth, familiar. Careful," Leonard said. "That piano isn't built for rock stars." Ozzy smiled softly. "I used to play before the world got loud." Everyone in the hall froze. Ozzy placed his trembling fingers on the keys, and then he played, not loud, not wild, not chaotic. He played a melody so soft, so painfully beautiful, that the whole hall felt like it had been dipped in moonlight. The violins stopped. The stage crew stopped. Even Leonard's arrogant smirk melted into disbelief. Ozzy wasn't just playing. He was telling a story of pain, of love, of nights alone in hotel rooms, of years lost to chaos, of dreams that drowned in fame, and the small piece of himself that music had always kept alive. The melody grew, then broke, then rose again with trembling hope. Someone in the back began crying. A violinist clutched her chest. Leonard stumbled backward, looking pale. Ozzy hit the final note soft, long, aching like a goodbye. No one moved. No one breathed. No one expected it. Finally, the hall erupted. Gasps, tears, shock. Leonard whispered, How did you?" Ozzy stood slowly. "You don't need to be a classical musician," he said gently. "You just need to feel something." And Leonard, one of the world's greatest pianists, had nothing to say, because he had just been outplayed by a man the world thought was only loud noise, a man who carried storms in his heart, a man named Ozzy Osbourne. The sound of Ozzy's final note still floated in the air like dust caught in a beam of golden light. Nobody moved. Nobody dared. It wasn't just music. It was confession. Ozzy Osbourne stepped back from the Steinway piano, as if he had just opened an old wound and laid it bare in front of strangers. And yet, those strangers were now staring at him with awe. A stagehand whispered, "I didn't know he could play like that." A violinist quietly wiped her tears. Even the conductor, a stern man feared across Europe, looked shaken. But the one most affected, most humiliated, most speechless was Leonard Strauss, the legendary pianist who had mocked Ozzy only minutes earlier. Leonard stepped forward, but his confident stride was gone. He looked like a man whose world had suddenly stopped making sense. "Ozzy," he whispered, "that piece, what was it?" Ozzy smiled faintly, pressing a hand over his heart. "Something I wrote when I thought music had left me." Leonard swallowed. "You composed that?" Ozzy didn't answer with words, just gave a slow nod. The hall erupted in hushed gasps. Leonard's cheeks flushed red. His pride was cracking, collapsing like burnt paper. He tried to recover. "Teeth, that was beginner's luck," he said, forcing a laugh that sounded painfully brittle. "You just stumbled through some emotional chords." But his voice lacked power, and the orchestra didn't laugh this time. Ozzy didn't fight. He didn't argue. He simply turned away like a man who had nothing to prove, because he didn't. His whole life had been proof enough. Leonard wasn't done. His ego couldn't allow silence. "Play it again," he snapped. "Right now." Ozzy looked over his shoulder with calm eyes. "No," he said softly. "Music isn't a machine you turn on for show." Leonard stepped forward aggressively. "Play it." His voice cracked. This wasn't a command anymore. It was desperation. Ozzy held his ground. "No." Leonard's face twisted. His voice rose, echoing across the golden hall. "You think you can walk in here, embarrass me, and then just leave? I'm Leonard Strauss. I am the spirit of this hall." Ozzy tilted his head, unbothered. "That's the problem," he said quietly. "You think music belongs to you. It doesn't. It belongs to everyone who feels something." Those words hit Leonard harder than the music itself. For a moment, he looked small. A young violinist stepped forward timidly. "Maestro Strauss," she said gently, "I think you should sit and breathe for a moment." Leonard's breath hitched. His chest rose too quickly. Ozzy took one step closer, concerned. "You okay, mate?" Leonard tried to answer, but his lips trembled and his knees buckled. He collapsed onto the bench. The entire orchestra rushed toward him. The audience balcony lights flickered on. Someone shouted for help. Ozzy was suddenly kneeling beside him. Leonard clutched the front of Ozzy's coat with shaking hands. His voice broke into a whisper, shaky, vulnerable, terrified. "Ozzy, how did you do that? I've spent my whole life on these keys. Why did your music feel more alive than mine?" Ozzy placed a hand on his shoulder. "Because I wasn't performing," he whispered. "I was remembering." Leonard's eyes filled with tears. He looked like a man seeing a truth he had avoided for years. The conductor arrived. Kneeling to Ozzy, he said urgently, "I think he's having a panic episode. Can you help us get him backstage?" Ozzy nodded immediately, with surprising gentleness. He and two musicians guided Leonard toward the wings of the stage. The once mighty pianist, the pride of the Royal Aurelius Hall, now leaned on the man he had mocked. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The hall buzzed with shocked whispers as they disappeared behind the velvet curtains. Backstage smelled of warm lights, wood, and history. Here, countless legends had performed their greatest triumphs. Tonight, two legends walked into the shadows together. Leonard sat heavily on a velvet chair, head in his hands. Ozzy stood quietly beside him, waiting. After several long moments, Leonard finally spoke, his voice barely audible. "Why didn't you tell anyone you could play like that?" Ozzy chuckled softly. "Mate, half the world thinks I can't even walk straight." Leonard cracked the tiniest smile through his tears. "And that piece, what do you call it?" Ozzy looked up, as if searching through memories long buried. "The Note That Broke Me." He answered. Leonard shivered. He whispered, "Play it for me again." Ozzy placed a hand on the grand piano backstage. "I'll play it," he said, "but only if you promise something." Leonard lifted his tear-filled eyes. "Anything." Ozzy leaned close. "Promise me you'll stop performing to impress people, and start performing because you feel something." Leonard froze. Those words, those simple words, were the thing he had forgotten, that the thing fame had stolen. He nodded slowly. "I promise." And Ozzy smiled. He sat down at the piano again. Leonard watched, trembling, and as Ozzy's fingers touched the keys, Leonard whispered, "Teach me." Ozzy's hands paused. The hall outside was silent. The stage was silent. The world felt silent. And then Ozzy nodded once, and began to play again. The first note rang out, soft, fragile, honest. Leonard covered his mouth, tears falling freely. Because this wasn't just music, this was healing for both of them. Backstage at the Royal Aurelius Hall, the world felt different. Dim golden bulbs glowed along the mirror frame. Dust floated like slow snowflakes. The air was thick with something deeper than music, truth, pain, and two lives that had been cracked by fame. Ozzy sat at the piano with the calm stillness of a man who had survived storms that would drown most humans. Leonard Strauss, the once untouchable, arrogant, brilliant maestro, sat beside him like a child seeing fire for the first time. And then, Ozzy played, but this time, the melody wasn't soft like before. It was fierce, raw, a storm ripping open the sky. Leonard's eyes widened. The notes were heavy, like footsteps of a man stumbling through years of chaos. Then they softened, like a lullaby meant for someone who never got to hear it. Leonard whispered, "This piece, it's different from before." Ozzy nodded slightly as he played. "There are two versions," he murmured. "One is what I felt, the other is what I survived." Leonard leaned closer, heart pounding. What inspired it?" Ozzy stopped playing. The final note hung in the air, resolved, aching. He stared straight ahead. His voice dropped. "It was the last thing I played before Sharon found me at my lowest." Leonard swallowed hard. Ozzy continued, his voice steady but fragile. "People think I was always loud, crazy, wild, but they don't know the nights I sat alone, in empty hotel rooms, playing until the sun came up. Music wasn't my escape." He looked down at his hands. "It was my confession." Leonard's eyes burned. Ozzy took a deep breath and placed both hands back on the keys. "This second version is everything I never said out loud." And he played again, harder, deeper. The melody rose like a cry for help, then fell like a man collapsing to his knees. Leonard gripped the side of his chair, trembling. "Ozzy," he whispered, "this isn't a song. It's your soul." Ozzy didn't stop. His fingers moved faster, but the speed wasn't pride. It was pain. Memories flooding through him. Mistakes. Lonely mornings. Fans screaming his name while he felt like a ghost. The melody cracked, shattered, then rebuilt itself with trembling hope. Leonard couldn't breathe. He suddenly understood something horrifying. Ozzy Osbourne wasn't playing a piano. He was telling the story of a man who nearly didn't survive himself. When the final note hit, a deep, thunderous cry that echoed off the backstage walls, Leonard gasped. Ozzy's shoulders dipped as if the note had torn something out of him. And then, silence. Leonard wiped his eyes. "I don't deserve to be a musician," he whispered shakily. "Not after hearing that." Ozzy turned his head slowly. "You're wrong." Leonard looked up, confused. Ozzy tapped his chest with one finger. "You lost this," he said quietly. "Your heart. You've been performing for applause, not for yourself." Leonard's throat tightened. Ozzy leaned closer. "Music isn't about perfection, mate. It's about telling the truth even when it hurts." Leonard broke. He covered his face and sobbed, shoulders shaking violently. The crew outside heard the sound and hesitated, but no one entered, because everyone backstage knew this wasn't weakness. This was a man finally shattering the armor he had worn for decades. Ozzy placed a hand on Leonard's back, comforting him gently. "Let it out," he whispered. "I've been there." Leonard cried harder. "I forgot why I started playing," he choked out. "I don't even know who I am without the applause." Ozzy nodded. "I spent years not knowing who I was, but the thing that saved me was remembering why I loved music before the world got loud." Leonard looked up, eyes red. "Help me remember." Ozzy gave a tired but warm smile. "Stand up." Leonard slowly stood. Ozzy pointed at the piano. "Bench, sit." Leonard sat. Ozzy stood behind him. "Now close your eyes." Leonard obeyed. Ozzy spoke softly, like a mentor guiding a child. "Forget the stage. Forget your reputation. Forget the critics. Forget me sitting here." Leonard's breathing slowed. "Now think," Ozzy said gently. "What did music mean to you before fame?" Leonard searched his mind. His lips trembled, and then he whispered, "Freedom." Ozzy smiled. "That's your first note," he said. "Now, play it." Leonard opened his eyes. He placed both hands on the keys. He pressed one soft note, then another, and another. A small melody began to form, shaky, simple, imperfect, but real. Leonard stopped abruptly, overwhelmed. "That's it," Ozzy whispered proudly. "That's the sound you've been missing." Leonard stared at the keys. I don't know how to thank you," Ozzy chuckled. "You don't have to. Just don't lose yourself again." Leonard stood shakily and hugged Ozzy, something no one in the world had ever imagined seeing. Ozzy patted his back like a father comforting a broken son. And then a voice called from the stage entrance. "Mr. Strauss, Mr. Osbourne, the gala committee wants to see you." Leonard wiped his tears. Ozzy took a deep breath. They walked together toward the stage doorway. What they didn't know was, The entire orchestra and staff were waiting on the other side, and they had heard everything. When Ozzy and Leonard stepped through the side door that led from backstage back toward the main hall, they expected to find only a few staff members waiting. Instead, they walked into a tunnel of eyes. Musicians lined both sides of the corridor. Violinists, cellists, trumpet players, percussionists, everyone who had been in the building was there, and they were all looking at Ozzy, not like a meme, not like a joke, not like a crazy rock legend out of place. They were looking at him like a composer, a teacher, a man who had just given back something sacred. For a few seconds, silence held the hallway in a tight grip. Then the youngest, violist barely in her 20s, lifted her bow and tapped it gently on her music stand. Once, twice, 3 times. A small, quiet, respectful applause began. Then it grew. In seconds. The narrow backstage passage filled with a rising wave of clap, soft at first, then louder, longer, somehow grateful. Ozzy blinked. He wasn't used to applause that felt like this. Not loud, drunken roars. Not stadium screams. This was reverence. Leonard took a shaky breath and stood a little taller at Ozzy's side. The conductor stepped forward. "Ozzy," he said, voice steady and formal, "we heard everything." Ozzy scratched the back of his neck, suddenly shy. "Yeah, sorry if I caused trouble, mate." The conductor actually smiled. "You didn't cause trouble," he said. "You reminded us why we are here." He turned to Leonard. "Meister Strauss, the gala committee is waiting in the director's lounge. They want to speak to you, and to Mr. Osbourne." Leonard nodded, glancing at Ozzy. "Come with me." Ozzy gave a small shrug. "Lead the way, Beethoven." Leonard exhaled a fragile laugh. "Not tonight," he murmured. "Tonight, I'm just Leonard." The offer that no one saw Mayanja. The director's lounge was a small but extravagant room, filled with velvet chairs, glass tables, and portraits of old composers staring down as if monitoring the living. 3 members of the gala committee sat waiting, 2 men in suits and an older woman with silver hair and sharp eyes. They looked serious. Leonard straightened. "Good evening," he began. "I apologize for any disturbance." The woman raised a hand. "We're not here to scold you," she said. "We're here to ask a question." Her gaze moved from Leonard to Ozzy. "Mr. Osbourne," she said, "would you consider performing tonight?" The words hit the room like a dropped chandelier. Leonard's jaw dropped. Ozzy actually pulled his head back. "Perform?" Ozzy repeated. "You want me to scream on stage for a classical fundraiser?" The older woman's lips curved. "No, we want you to play that piece." The room fell very still. Leonard turned slowly to Ozzy, eyes wide. "You told them," Ozzy whispered. The conductor, who had followed them in and was standing in the corner, spoke up. "There are mics everywhere in this hall," he said gently. "Backstage too." "We heard it in the control room." Everyone did. The silver-haired woman leaned forward. "That piece," she said softly, "whatever it was, it's the most honest sound I've heard in this building in years." Ozzy looked down at his hands. They were still faintly trembling. I'm not sure I can just get up and do that again on command," he said quietly. Leonard stepped forward. "What if," he said slowly, "you don't do it alone?" Ozzy raised a brow. Leonard looked at the committee, then the conductor. "Change the program," Leonard said. "Tonight's headlining piece will be a world premiere." The younger committee member frowned. "We don't have anything prepared." "You do now," Leonard cut in. He pointed at Ozzy. "Ozzy Osbourne will debut a piece for piano and orchestra, and I'll play beside him." The conductor's eyebrows shot up. "You want a duet?" Leonard nodded. "Ozzy's melody, my structure, his heart, my technique, your orchestra." He turned back to Ozzy. "Let's tell your story to everyone," he said softly. "Not just to me." Ozzy stared at him for a long time. "You know this could ruin your whole untouchable maestro image, right?" he said finally. Leonard gave a small, sad smile. "That image nearly cost me my soul," he replied. "I don't want it anymore." The silver-haired woman put her hands flat on the table. "If you can be ready in 1 hour," she said, "we'll move your piece to the closing performance." She looked at Ozzy. "This gala is for mental health and music therapy charities," she reminded them. "Your story, your music, fits this theme more than anything we had planned." Ozzy exhaled slowly. 1 hour to shape a lifetime of pain into something beautiful, but 1 hour to decide if he wanted to open that wound, not just backstage, but in front of the world. He thought of the years he'd lost, the nights he didn't think he'd wake up, the people he'd almost pushed away. The fans who had told him his music saved them, without knowing it was also saving him. He looked up, eyes suddenly clear. "All right," he said. "Let's scare them a little. 1 hour to turn pain into a swampy Choanwythe. Next 60 minutes were a blur." The conductor scribbled notes at lightning speed, pulling from memory what he'd heard Ozzy play backstage. The orchestra gathered on stage, rehearsing fragments while sound engineers updated the program. Leonard and Ozzy sat at the 2 grand pianos that had been rolled to center. Stage normally reserved for big-name duet concerts, but tonight, they weren't just instruments, they were confessionals. Leonard tapped his pencil against sheet paper. "Okay," he said, trying to steady his thoughts. "Your first version, the softer one, that's the opening. A fragile solo. Just you." He pointed at Ozzy. "That's the boy alone in the hotel room." Ozzy nodded slowly. "Then the second version," Leonard continued. "The storm, the breakdown, that's where the orchestra joins in. The chaos, the pressure, the fame, the noise." The conductor listened and nodded. "We'll bring in the strings first," he said. "Then brass, then percussion. We'll let the harmony crush him, then free him." Ozzy looked intrigued. "So it's like My Life, but with violins," Leonard chuckled. "Exactly." They worked fast. Leonard wrote counter-melodies under Ozzy's main theme, turning raw emotion into a complex conversation between 2 pianos. Ozzy would play the scarred, broken, human melody. Leonard would answer with disciplined, classical lines. 2 worlds colliding on the same keys. At one point, Ozzy paused and sighed. "What if I mess it up?" he murmured. Leonard looked at him, eyes firm. "Then it will be real," he said. "And that's the whole point, isn't it?" Ozzy stared at him, then smiled. "Yeah," he whispered, "that's the whole point." The gala began by the time the main doors opened and guests poured into the hall. The updated program had been quietly printed and placed on every seat. Line 12, Final Performance. World Premiere, The Note That Broke Me, co-credited, Ozzy Osbourne and Leonard Strauss for 2. Pianos and orchestra people thought it was a misprint. Someone in the front row laughed. "Ozzy Osbourne, the rocker, ha, that must be a joke." Another guest snapped a picture of the program and posted it online with a caption. "What kind of crossover event is this?" They had no idea. The night went on, speeches were made, short performances played, charity videos shown. But in the wings, behind the curtain, Ozzy paced. Leonard flexed his fingers nervously. The conductor whispered last-minute instructions. The orchestra tuned low, tense notes. Finally, the stage manager signaled, "You're on after this cello solo," she whispered. 3 minutes. Leonard looked at Ozzy. "If you want to back out," he said softly, "this is your last chance." Ozzy rolled his shoulders, pulled in a long breath, and looked at the glowing edge of the stage curtain. "Nah," he replied. "I have enough ghosts already. I'm not adding this one." The SHOCK announcer walked to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "our final performance tonight is something unexpected." The audience murmured. "We present the world premiere of a new piece, The Note That Broke Me, co-written by Leonard Strauss." Polite applause, and Ozzy Osbourne. The hall shifted. Gasps, whispers, unbelieving laughter. Someone in the upper balcony muttered, "This has to be some PR stunt." Then the curtains opened. 2 pianos, 1 orchestra. Leonard Strauss, in a black suit, face calmer than anyone had ever seen him, and beside him, Ozzy Osbourne, long hair, black coat, round glasses catching the light, like twin moons. No guitar, no microphone. Just his hands. The hall froze. Ozzy walked to his piano slowly, every step echoing like a choice. He sat down. Leonard nodded at him once. "You ready?" he whispered. Ozzy glanced sideways and smirked faintly. "Let's see if they can handle the quiet." The conductor lifted his baton. The hall became so silent, it almost hummed. Ozzy placed his fingers on the keys, and began, "The Note That Broke and Healed Everyone." The first notes were as soft as breath. They floated over the crowd, barely louder than a whisper, but crystal clear. It was the same fragile melody Ozzy had played backstage, the one he wrote in lonely rooms years ago. Only now, thousands of eyes were watching. The sound moved through the hall like a confession carried on light. Each chord was a childhood memory. Each pause, a night he thought he wouldn't get through. Somewhere, in the second row, a young woman, who'd been a lifelong fan, suddenly pressed a hand over her mouth. "That's him," she whispered shakily. "That's really him." Beneath all the noise, The melody unfolded. No drums, no distortion, no screaming, only truth. When Ozzy reached a trembling high note, a desperate question hanging in the ear, the conductor lowered his baton slightly. Leonard took his cue. His piano entered, clear, structured, soothing. It wrapped around Ozzy's melody like a hand reaching out to a drowning man. The hall felt it too. Pianos, one raw and wounded, one disciplined and controlled, talking to each other, arguing, crying, consoling. Then the strings joined in. They rose slowly like a rising tide behind Ozzy's theme. Building tension. Brass followed. Percussion rolled in like distant thunder. The sound grew and grew until it felt like the whole hall was shaking, not with volume, but with feeling. Ozzy leaned harder into the keys. His part became chaotic, overwhelmed by the orchestra. The notes clashed, tangled, almost broke. This was the storm. This was the fame. This was the pressure, the addiction, the lost pieces of himself. The audience watched, stunned. It sounded like a man being swallowed by the very world that praised him. Then everything cut. One beat, two beats, silence. Just one lonely note from Ozzy's piano, trembling in the void, bare, exposed, almost defeated. Leonard looked at him, hands hovering over his keys. This was the moment. Instead of overpowering him, instead of showing off, instead of racing ahead, Leonard played under Ozzy. Soft chords. Support. A. Foundation. Not. A rival. A friend. The orchestra rejoined, but gentler now, like light slowly breaking through storm clouds. Ozzy's melody, once broken into shards, returned. Not the same. Stronger. More honest. No longer fighting the orchestra, but walking with it. The final section swelled with hope, not cheesy, not perfect, but fragile hope. The kind that comes after surviving something you thought would end you. The last note wasn't a bang. It wasn't a scream. It was a held, resonant chord on both pianos. Leonard and Ozzy's hands touching the same harmony. The orchestra faded beneath them, leaving just those two sounds. Two men, two lives, meeting in the middle. The chord lingered, and slowly faded into silence. This time, nobody dared to breathe until the sound truly vanished. Ozzy lifted his hands. His chest rose and fell. He didn't bow. He just sat there, letting the quiet wash over him like waves over stones. Then someone in the back stood up, then another, and another. In seconds, the entire Royal Aurelius Hall was on its feet. Thunderous applause erupted, but it wasn't the stadium roar he was used to. This applause felt like thank you, the twist. The clapping went on and on. When it finally softened, Leonard stepped toward the microphone. His hands were trembling, but his voice was clear. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "tonight, I need to confess something." The hall quieted. "Earlier today," he continued, "I mocked this man." He turned slightly, gesturing to Ozzy. "I treated him like a joke, like someone whose place was not in this hall. I believed classical music belonged to people like me, trained, polished, applauded." He swallowed hard. "I was wrong." He looked at Ozzy, and there was nothing but respect in his eyes. "This music you just heard, the soul of it, the heart of it, came from him, from his pain, his regrets, his survival." He turned back to the crowd. "I am not the star of tonight," he said. "I am the student." A ripple went through the audience. Leonard continued, "As of tonight, I am founding a new scholarship and program with the hall." He glanced at the committee, who looked just as surprised as everyone else. "For musicians who feel broken, lost, or forgotten. For artists fighting mental battles in silence. It will be called," he paused, "the Voices of Darkness Fund." Ozzy's eyes widened. Leonard smiled softly. "Because some of the most powerful music doesn't come from light," he said. "It comes from the darkest corners of the soul, where people like Ozzy refuse to give up." The crowd exploded with applause again. Ozzy stared at Leonard, genuinely stunned. "You just made a charity, named after my worst days," he said hoarsely. Leonard chuckled through tears. "No," he replied. "I named it after the way you turned your worst days into something that saved others." Ozzy looked out at the crowd. Some were crying, some were cheering, some were just standing there, shocked, hands over their hearts. He stepped toward the mic. "I don't usually talk this much without swearing," he began, earning a shaky laugh from the room. "But tonight was special." He looked at his hands again. "I wrote that piece when I didn't know if I wanted to see another morning," he said quietly. "I never thought I'd play it here, or anywhere." He looked at the orchestra. "At some point, I forgot that music wasn't about being loud, or being famous, or being the craziest person in the room. He tapped his chest. It was about this. He looked at the audience once more. If any of you out there feel like you're drowning, like your mind is louder than the world, don't give up. Find your note, even if it's quiet, even if no one hears it at first. He smiled faintly, because one day, that note might save you, like it saved me. The hall fell into a deep, reverent silence. Then the applause rose again, greater than before. Epilogue. The video that went around the WRLD. Someone in the balcony had recorded the entire performance on their phone. Within hours, the clip of Ozzy Osbourne and Leonard Strauss playing the note that broke me had spread across social media like wildfire. People who had only ever seen Ozzy screaming into a microphone now watched him coax the softest, most vulnerable sounds from a piano. Comments flooded in. I didn't know he could play piano like this. I'm crying. What is this piece? How did a rock legend just outfill an entire classical world? This saved me tonight. You have no idea. Music journalists called it the night of two legends. Classical fans argued online, then finally admitted, okay, I was wrong about him. And somewhere, in quiet rooms, people who thought they were alone in their darkness listened to that recording and felt a little less alone. As the camera fades from the grand piano and the standing ovation, your narrator's voice comes in. If this story touched your heart, don't let it end here. Ozzy Osbourne didn't just play a piano tonight. He opened his soul and reminded the world that even the loudest legends carry silent scars. Subscribe to our channel, Voices of Darkness, for more emotional, real, and powerful stories from the shadow side of music and life. Like this video if you felt even one note inside your chest. Share this video with your friends so they can feel this story too. You never know who might need to hear it tonight. And if you love Ozzy Osbourne, then share this video right now and help us complete our 1,000 subscribers target. Prove your love for Ozzy by spreading his story. Comment your name below and tell us which moment hit you the hardest. Your name might be used as a character in our next Voices of Darkness story. Fade out on the image of the two pianos under dim golden light. The note that broke him became the note that healed others.